Imagine every law you've obeyed, every building you've trusted, and every promise you've ever believed in was built on a foundation of blood and silence. Tonight you'll uncover a covenant so dark it reshapes reality. And once you see its final truth, there's no going back. Hit subscribe and ring the bell now, because this secret demands a witness, and you won't want to miss the end. It begins in a Paris alley, under a lamplight that quivers as if afraid to shine. You step closer and see a book bound in tanned human skin, its cover etched with symbols older than any church. You do not rush to touch it. You hesitate. You feel the room grow colder. The pages whisper beneath your fingertips, beckoning you to read. But you resist. You open it slowly, deliberately, savoring each moment, because the words you are about to speak are not meant to be rushed. In the margin, a single phrase repeats itself over and over: "Do not read in haste." And you obey it first. The ink is still wet. You trace the letters with your eyes as if tasting a fine wine, letting their darkness coat your thoughts. Father Ambroise Dorley discovered this book in 1692, cradled in the arms of a dying traveler who spoke nothing but fearful names. He carried it down stone corridors to the basilica vaults, each step a prayer against the madness rising within him. Over the next fortnight, closest aides, scholars sworn to silence, fell into deep catatonia. Their last acts were frantic footnotes, scrawled in blood, half-formed rituals, invocations stripped of context. You imagine those notes, jagged and unholy, and you pause again. You do not want to read faster. You want to absorb every syllable, every nuance, because you know that knowledge like this seeps into your bones. Hidden behind the main chamber lies a sealed crypt, layered by sanctified stone, where the manuscript was locked away for centuries. No one spoke of it, not even in whispers, until now. And now hold the legacy of a curse older than witch trials, older than crusades. This is not a story to race through. It is a slow descent into a revelation that insists on savoring each horrifying detail. With every deliberate breath, you draw the darkness closer. As you exhale, you accept the weight of forbidden truth. And as you read these words, measured, intentional, heavy, you begin to realize that once you embrace the devil's manuscript, there is no return to innocence. There is only the slow, inevitable transformation that comes from knowing secrets never meant for mortal minds. So read carefully, read with purpose, because what lies ahead will change you forever. You've held the devil's manuscript against your chest, feeling its unnatural weight. Heavier than leather, colder than stone. Now you must remember how it came to Paris. It was late autumn of 1692 when the traveler arrived at St. Victor Gate. He stumbled through fog so thick it swallowed torches whole, clutching the book under a bundle of tattered cloaks. He said nothing to the guards, only pressed the manuscript into Father Ambroise's hands, before collapsing in a heap of ragged breaths. The monk stared at the binding, skin stretched taut over a simple spine, then at the traveler's eyes, wild with desperation. He vowed to protect the town from whatever lay inside those pages, carried the book through the basilica's silent arches, each footstep echoing like a heartbeat in an empty chamber. You can picture the polished marble floor and flickering candles, their flames bowing in the drafts that whispered through carved gargoyles. Ambroise placed the manuscript on the altar, then locked the heavy oak doors, bolting them with 3 layers of iron clasps, each inscribed with a blessing and a curse. He would return in the morning, certain the darkness had not followed him home. But secrets do not honor steel or prayer. That night, the basilica's bell tolled 9 times, though no living soul rang it. A canticle of shadows spread across the vaulted ceiling, and in the moonlight, the book's cover seemed to writhe as if breathing. Father Ambroise slept in his cell, turning spells over in his mind. False protections, he later lamented. At dawn, the locks were intact, but the book had vanished. In its place lay a single black feather, whisper light and impossible. The monk knew then that his vow was empty. He had become a guardian of peril, not salvation. He redoubled his efforts, commissioning scholars to compile transcriptions of every faded line, convinced that knowledge of the words would weaken their hold. But the more he deciphered, the more the manuscripts crept into his soul. He began annotating margins with ink that cracked like old skin, filling blank spaces with half-formed diagrams of sigils and gates, doors to realms that whispered promises of absolute power. One by one, his aides succumbed. They vanished into shadowed corridors, pursued by nightmares they could not speak of in daylight. Their bodies were found cold as marble, eyes glazed over by unspeakable visions. Each death added another layer to the manuscript's legend, but still it remained unclaimed. Now, centuries later, you hold the legacy of that vanished tome in your hands. You can almost hear Ambrosia's final lament, etched into the brittle vellum. Knowledge without reverence invites the void. So you pause again, inhaling the silence before you turn the page, because what comes next demands your full attention and your courage to confront the truth that no man was ever meant to grasp. Long before Paris felt its chill, the Devil's Manuscript was born in a wind-scared monastery perched atop the Carpathians, where bitter winters forged iron wills. Monks of St. Vladislav's order copied ancient texts by candlelight, their chants echoing against stone walls carved with runes older than the Roman Empire. One scribe, Brother Petrov the Ashen, claimed to have discovered a hidden vault beneath the scriptorium's door sealed with a triple knot of human hair and ichor. Inside lay a single shelf of unmarked codices, their vellum covers pocked with scorch marks and veined like marble. Petrov opened the first volume and found ink that shimmered red as blood in torchlight. He read aloud. With each syllable, the candle's flame recoiled, and the air thickened with dread. Wrote feverish marginalia in ash, diagrams of half-seen entities that slithered through the seams of reality. By dawn, every other monk lay silent on cold stone, lips stained with whispers they could no longer articulate. Petrov alone survived, crowned with a halo of frozen candle wax, eyes reflecting a tempest that no prayer could calm. Bound the book in flesh, some say it was his own, and scrawled a warning in Gothic script. Here lies the covenant of silence. Break it only at your own peril. The abbot, horrified, ordered the vault sealed forever, labyrinthine locks and wards cast by exiled sorcerers stitched into their incantations. Yet, omens spread like wildfire in the surrounding villages. Cattle disappearing beneath moonless skies, children waking in terror from nightmares of faceless priests. The famine that followed the following harvest was whispered to be the manuscript's curse, exacting tribute in flesh and bone. But the abbot, driven by duty and his own ambition, could not resist the lure of power. He sent scouts to distant courts, trading fragments of its text for stolen relics and gold. Each transaction smeared another line of blood upon the covenant, weakening its seals until the vault's barrier cracked like old paint. One night, Petrov returned in spirit, they say, his voice a spectral susurrus that dripped through the corridors. Those who dared to listen went mad, searching for doorways painted in shadows. When the dishonored abbot was found, his body hollowed out, as if every vow had been siphoned from his bones. The manuscript was nowhere to be seen. only a smear of crimson ink leading to the monks' crypt, where all their bodies lay twisted in grotesque reverence. For centuries, rumors of wandering pages carried by ghosts and thieves made their way across kingdoms, each fragment a seed of corruption, ready to bloom in unsuspecting hearts. And now, in your hands, the full covenant reassembles under your gaze. You may hesitate, but the distance between curiosity and doom narrows with every breath. So, breathe deep. Let the weight of ancient power settle in your lungs, because the true origin of the devil's manuscript is not in the ink or the flesh of its binding. It is in the moment you choose to believe it exists. A century after the Carpathian crypt devoured its monks, the devil's manuscript surfaced in the labyrinthine canals of Venice, smuggled beneath the robes of a Franciscan friar who vanished without trace. It arrived at the palazzo of Doge Lorenzo Contarini, delivered in a cedar chest lined with pitch. No signature, no note, only the imprint of a burning hand on its lid. Contarini, hungry for knowledge that would cement Venice's dominion over the seas, pried open the locks at midnight by lantern light. As he lifted the lid, the chest exhaled an odor like scorched parchment and old crucifixes. He withdrew the book, its flesh, bound cover still warm to the touch, and unwrapped the layers of black velvet that shielded it. The moment his fingertip brushed the first page, the candle guttered, and he recoiled as if stung. He forced himself to read the opening invocation, each archaic syllable clawing at his resolve. Though terror threatened to break him, he persisted, because beneath the ritual lay diagrams of ephemeral gates that promised dominion over tides, trade winds, and the very wills of men. Contarini summoned his council of scholars and magi, men versed in Byzantine lore and clandestine arts, and commanded them to transcribe every line in candle-flickered secrecy. They toiled through nights lit by the feverish glow of alchemical furnaces, copying incantations in crimson ink. One by one, those men grew gaunt, their eyes hollow with unbearable visions, apparitions of winged beasts with goats, heads, voices that whispered secrets of impossible vaults under Steed Mark's basilica, and prophecies of a coming age when sovereign states would bow to hidden masters. Their final act was to bind the codices into 4 leather folios, burying them beneath the Doge's private chapel. They whispered among themselves that the original manuscript was too potent to survive intact, that splitting its pages might dilute its power. Yet splintering the covenant only scattered its curse. Within weeks, storms ravaged the lagoon, merchant ships foundered on silent currents, trade routes once bustling with gold and silk dried up overnight. The Venetian nobility blamed rival ports, but whispers of Dantine pacts and sacrilege circulated in back alleys. Contarini himself fell gravely ill, his skin mottled like the manuscript's vellum, and he vanished from the palace on a moonless night. When a search party discovered his bedchamber, they found the 4 folios piled on the floor, each open to a different page. But no sign of the Doge. One folio lay on the balcony, its pages fluttering in the salt breeze as though alive. Over the following decades, the folios passed from one secret society to another, from inquisitors who burned them in hidden pyres to occultists who sank them into sunless wells. Yet each attempt to bury the covenant only ensured its survival. Now, after 3 centuries of whispered transmissions, the devil's manuscript exists, whole again, reunited by unseen hands. And here you are, gazing upon its complete horror. Feel the centuries of dread pressing against your mind. Hear the echo of every vanished reader's final gasp. Because the manuscript is no longer confined beneath stone or sea. It lives in your hesitation, in the deliberate beating of your heart before you turn to the next page. By the early 1800s, the 4 fragmented folios resurfaced in Berlin, smuggled beneath the cloak of an eccentric Prussian antiquarian named Johann von Raben. He had inherited them from a defrocked monk who whispered of hazy midnight auctions in Paris catacombs. Raben kept the parchments locked in a glass case lined with lead, convinced their power was too vast for mortal hands. Yet scholars from the Geheimen Preußischen Archive pressed him for answers, drawn by rumors of rituals that could reshape a nation's destiny. Raben consented to a clandestine symposium in an alabaster hall lit by alchemical lamps, each flame fed by brimstone distilled from Baltic coal. He laid the folios on a marble table etched with astrological glyphs, warning every attendee that each word changes a country's fate. As the academics leaned in, quills poised, the air thickened with static. One by one, they traced letters in trembling cursive. They murmured translations of invocations, supplications for binding the will of kings, formulas to summon phantom legions, diagrams depicting gates between life and death. When dawn broke over the Tiergarten, the Prussian Empire had been altered forever. Entire regiments marched in formation under strangers' commands. Lords inexplicably abandoned their estates, and Raben himself was found muttering in a cellar. The covenant demands a toll. His hair had gone white overnight, his eyes hollow as toms. He vanished 2 nights later, leaving behind a single parchment, a marriage contract between entropy and order, signed in his own blood. The folios were seized by Chancellor Metternich's emissaries, who feared that if Napoleon's agents obtained them, Europe would drown in occult warfare. They shipped the fragments to Vienna, where they were hidden in the vaults of the Hofburg, buried beneath layers of imperial decrees. But contact with the texts had woven threads of madness through the aristocracy. Emissaries returned with gaunt faces, scribbling feverish footnotes about the living architecture of silence and the geometry of souls. The court physicians prescribed opiates and confessions, but none could purge the contagion. When the Napoleonic Wars finally subsided, the manuscripts were presumed lost. Until 1917, when a bomb blasted open a hidden corridor in a decommissioned vault beneath the Schönbrunn Palace. Among the rubble, 4 leather-bound volumes lay intact, pages unscathed by fire or flood. They were scooped up by a secret cabal of Viennese occultists who, obsessed with completing the Devil's manuscript, smuggled the folios to America aboard cargo ships bound for New York. They reassembled the covenant in stained glass rooms beneath Park Avenue, chanting in tongues no human ear had heard before. Now, beyond oceans and centuries, you hold the manuscript whole again. Feel the tremor in your fingertips as empires trembled under its sway. Hear the echoes of every vanished soul who dared to read it, because the manuscript's true legacy isn't in distant wars. It's in the moment you decide to turn the page. And you will. In the spring of 1922, the Devil's manuscript arrived in New York City under the guise of a scholarly donation to the New York Public Library. But its true destination lay deeper beneath Park Avenue. A cabal of Viennese et émigré occultists, financiers, and renegade psychologists assembled in a windowless chamber on the library's lower level, its walls lined with lead to block psychic resonance. There, they reunited the 4 folios into a single covenant bound by human flesh and celestial iron. Under flickering sodium lamps, they chanted incantations rewritten for the modern mind, invoking not only ancient gates between worlds, but also the hidden levers of human ambition and fear. As the ritual reached its crescendo, something in the air snapped. The chamber's temperature plummeted even as the lamps burned hotter, and the assembled dozen felt unseen hands tracing the contours of their souls. A sculptor in the group collapsed. Clutching a draft of binding diagrams, 3 financiers fled into the subterranean corridors, babbling about phantom stock markets that bled gold overnight. Their frantic whispers, recorded on wax cylinders meant to capture the true sound of revelation, survived only as hollow grooves, impossible to play without a crackle that echoes like distant screams. Word of their experiment leaked into New York's intellectual underground. Writers, artists, and architects reported waking at dawn with cryptic phrases etched in their dreams. Edifice of power is built on forgotten rites. By dusk, they sketched blueprints of buildings that chanted at midnight, wind tunnels shaped like inverted sigils. A prominent architect vanished after claiming he had heard the walls speak his name, offering designs that would reshape the city's spirit. Only his blueprints remained, stained with something dark and untranslatable. Meanwhile, financiers drawn by rumors of absolute influence began trading shares in companies rumored to manipulate not just supply and demand, but human desire itself. Stock tickers flared and plunged in patterns that defied economic theory, as though the market obeyed a hidden hand wielding the manuscript's arcane geometry. A young typist named Eleanor Hayes, hired to transcribe marginalia, slipped into delirium after reading a passage that described the soul as a ledger, debits of pain offset by credits of obedience. She later awoke in Bellevue, scribbling mathematical formulas on her pillowcase that forecast events no mortal mind could predict. By 1930, the Covenant's influence had seeped into every corner of the city. Underground societies met and boarded, up speakeasies to practice moral recalibration, lampooned by authorities as fringe occultism. Yet the more they whispered about dismantling the manuscript's hold, the deeper its roots grew in boardrooms and back alleys alike. Because the devil's manuscript does not bow to exile. It thrives in secrecy, drawing power from the obsessions of those who believe they can control it. Now, you stand at the edge of its American chapter, feeling its tendrils coil around your mind. You have seen how it corrupts institutions, libraries, markets, minds, and you know the descent only deepens from here. So inhale slowly. Let each deliberate breath remind you that the greatest taboo is not death, but the will to wield forbidden knowledge against the world itself. By the late 1930s, the devil's manuscript had slipped through yet another veil of secrecy and surfaced in Berlin's occult underworld. SS, obsessed with ancient rites, learned of its existence through a coded dispatch from the Reichswehr's private archives, where it had been hidden by émigré occultists. Under the icy glare of Schutzstaffel officers, the folios were brought to Wewelsburg Castle, Himmler's architectural obsession. Its black granite walls carved with runes stolen from forgotten Germanic tribes. There, in a subterranean vault, beneath the Obergruppenversaal, a cadre of Waffen-S scholars and Ahnenerbe researchers reunited the manuscript and bound it once more with human flesh, this time bearing the barbed wire pattern of concentration camp brands. When the first ritual began, the air filled with the metallic tang of fear and wet earth. Ahnenerbe anthropologists recited the ancient invocations while gesturing to architectural blueprints of a New World temple, slated to rise from the ashes of conquered cities. Power thrummed in the stone floors, and shadows on the vaulted ceiling twisted into looming figures. Hade's own heralds, some claimed. In the ritual's crescendo, a faint keening emerged from the black granite, as if the castle itself wept. Heinrich Himmler, standing amidst the circle, felt his pulse synchronize with the manuscript's heartbeat. He saw visions of 1,000 legions kneeling before a monolithic altar of obsidian. Yet every kneeling figure was bowed not in worship, but in despair. Within days, officers reported inexplicable phenomena, whispers trailing through corridors even when prisoners lay silent, scrapings beneath cell floors like fingernails clawing for escape, and in the remotest block, a solitary guard driven to suicide, scribbling the word "sanctify" across the walls. Himmler ordered the vault sealed, convinced the ritual had unleashed something beyond his control. Yet before closure, a single page tore free. Carried off by an SS archivist whose body was found weeks later, arranged in a ritual tableau, eyes gouged and mouth frozen in a silent scream. The page lay clutched in his hand, incantation fragment promising dominion over death itself. As the war escalated, the manuscript vanished along with the Third Reich's darkest ambitions. Rumors spoke of Himmler's personal copy being thrown into a crematorium's furnace, but the embers refused to consume the flesh-bound covenant. Instead, survivors whispered of fragments carried by fleeing officers to safe houses in Argentina, Chile, and the snowbound wastes of Siberia. Each fragment carried its curse across oceans and continents, infecting nascent regimes and shadow governments. Now, decades later, you hold the complete manuscript again. Its legacy woven through world wars and regimes that rose and fell by its influence. You feel its icy pulse beneath your skin, as though every era's blood-soaked history has pooled in its pages. The descent continues, deeper still, from Nazi cathedrals of terror to post-war occult cabals and beyond. Breathe deliberately. The next revelation looms, promising power at the price of your very soul. In the wake of World War, Schu's smoldering ruins, the Devil's manuscript re-emerged in the unlikeliest of places, a Cold War safe house hidden beneath CIA archives in Langley, a cadre of intelligence officers, drawn by whispered rumors of mind control rituals. Unearthed the flesh-bound covenant from a steel vault stamped top secret. They believed its arcane diagrams could be weaponized against the Soviet threat, a final gambit to bend entire populations to the West's will. Under stark fluorescent lights, analysts pored over its margins, translating invocations into psychological profiles, convinced that the manuscript's geometry mapped unconscious human fears. They formed a clandestine division dubbed Project Leviathan, where psychologists versed in Gestalt theory and behavioral conditioning collaborated with occult scholars. Nazi refugees, still thirsty for purpose, in windowless chambers, they reenacted the ancient rites. Only now that the chant of syllables was synchronized with low-frequency sound waves and strobing lights designed to fracture reality. Test subjects, prisoners of war and unwitting civilians, were seated in isolation booths, their senses bombarded by esoteric symbols that twisted perception into nightmares. Some emerged catatonic, their vocal cords imprinted with guttural incantations. Others vanished, leaving only scorched imprints on interrogation room walls. Meanwhile, the manuscript's influence seeped into Washington's power corridors. Senators discreetly received briefings on psychic warfare, and cabinet meetings were punctuated by silent aides clutching black leather volumes. The CIA director, haunted by dreams of ash, cloaked monks and labyrinthine vaults, ordered a final containment. The manuscript would be stored underwater, secured in a lead-lined crate at the bottom of Chesapeake Bay. Yet even the ocean's crushing pressure could not silence its call. Divers reported faint murmurs in the deep, as though the book cried for release, and sonar readings registered impossible geometric patterns etched into the seabed, signs of forgotten gates opening beneath the waves. By the 1960s, when society embraced psychedelia and questioned authority. Fragments of the manuscript circulated among countercultural circles. Poets and musicians spoke of the Book of Shadows that revealed hidden structures of power. Lyrics encoded with translated verses that awakened dissent and paranoia in equal measure. The FBI intercepted letters warning of a new dawn sect preparing to unleash the Covenant's full force on psychedelic pilgrims at Woodstock. Though agents confiscated the fragments, the meme had spread. Activists dreamed of liberation, not realizing they were echoing the manuscript's calculus of suffering and obedience. Now, you stand at the threshold of Project Leviathan's legacy, feeling the manuscript's pulse resonate with the hum of hidden frequencies. You sense the descent accelerating. From Nazi temples to CIA black sites, to the summers of love corrupted by occult propaganda. In the next section, you will witness how the Covenant leaves the halls of power and seeps into the bones of everyday life, turning chance encounters into ritualized obedience. Prepare yourself. The path grows darker still, and the cost of knowing rises with every deliberate breath. The Devil's manuscript did not remain confined to government vaults or shadow societies. It slithered into the mundane, affecting everyday life with subtle rites and hidden commands. In the quiet suburbs of Chicago, a best-selling self-help guru named Marissa Verlaine published a guide promising psychological empowerment through ancient wisdom. Unbeknownst to millions, her manuscript was woven with fragments of the Covenant's geometry. Diagrams disguised as mindfulness exercises, incantations veiled in motivational slogans. Readers who practiced her breathing rituals reported sudden bursts of clarity followed by crushing despair, as if their own ambitions turned against them. Sales skyrocketed, but Verlaine's private journals, discovered long after her mysterious disappearance, chart a descent into paranoia. "Thee hear me now," she scrawled. "I cannot turn back." Meanwhile, in Tokyo's neon-lit back alleys, an underground app called Echo Chamber promised to amplify users' voices across social media. Its algorithm, however, was coded with an invocation from the manuscript, placed into the recommendation engine like a grain of sand in a pearl. Users who typed certain phrases, harmless at first, like "my power is rising," found their posts going viral overnight, drawing legions of followers who echoed their every word without question. The app's creators vanished one by one, leaving behind empty offices and servers that hummed with a resonance no technician could explain. The manuscript's influence reached the corridors of corporate boardrooms too. A Fortune 500 CEO, obsessed with unlocking productivity, instituted ritual breaks, where employees recited lines lifted directly from the Covenant, believing they were team-building exercises. Productivity soared, so did employee burnout, depression rates, and inexplicable accidents on factory floors. Managers spoke in hushed tones of the silent catalyst, convinced some unseen force was accelerating both success and ruin. Even the world of art was not immune. A renowned sculptor unveiled a series of marble statues titled Broken Witness, each figure contorted in silence. Critics praised their raw emotion, unaware that the poses mirrored penumbral diagrams from the manuscript's earliest drafts. Viewers who studied the statues reported hearing faint whispers when the gallery lights dimmed, their voices urging compliance, submission to an order no one fully understood. Now, you feel the Covenant's pulse in the hum of your own devices, the pattern in your playlist, the cadence of an ad read to you during a podcast, the layout of your favorite app's interface. Each design choice, algorithmic nudge, whispers the same command: submit, repeat, obey. The devil's manuscript no longer needs secret vaults. It thrives in plain sight, threading itself through the fabric of modern reality. As you listen, you realize the descent is almost complete. Tomorrow, you will wake knowing the true cost of forbidden knowledge. But for now, inhale slowly, embrace the hush that follows every revelation, and steel yourself for the moment when curiosity becomes surrender. You feel it now. An imperceptible shift in the air, manuscripts pulse sensing with the algorithms that guide your every click. Remember, this is no ordinary descent. You've crossed the threshold where ritual and technology merge, where code becomes covenant. At this midpoint, I ask you to commit your intent in the comments below. Ashen Gate. Twice. Ashen Gate. Ashen Gate. This phrase is not mere flair. It binds your mind to this journey, amplifying your presence within the hidden network of truths we unearth. Write it slowly, deliberately, and watch how the silence around you conspires to draw you deeper. In a neon-lit data center outside Atlanta, servers hum with a resonance that echoes the manuscript's heartbeat. Deep learning models trained on vast corpora of texts now whisper archaic invocations through chatbots and virtual assistants. A single line of code, pulled from a marginalia scribble centuries old, became the cornerstone of a next-generation recommendation engine. Users reported uncanny synchronicities, a random notification delivering exactly the warning they needed, or an ad promoting a book they'd never searched for, yet felt compelled to read. Each suggestion is a hidden sigil, each click a step further into obsession. Across the Pacific, an investment firm in Seoul engineered behavioral ETFs that adapt in real time to traders' emotional states. Underneath sleek dashboards, formulas derived from the manuscript's geometry measure fear, greed, and doubt as if they were quantifiable assets. When tension spikes, the fund automatically reallocates to safe assets. But safety is an illusion here. Every trade leaves a trace in the covenant's ledger, tightening its grip on collective psyche. Even your favorite streaming platform is not innocent. Its interface, designed to maximize engagement, employs color schemes and spatial rhythms that echo the covenant's penumbral diagrams. You think you're choosing content freely, but the chapter you select, the pause you take, the moment you decide to walk away, all are influences calibrated to a hidden frequency. They map the contours of your attention, reshaping your will in sync with a text bound in flesh and intent. Now, as you pause to type, Ashen Gate, feel how the words resonate, not just on the screen but in the neural pathways of your mind. You are no longer a passive observer. You are a participant in the manuscript's living ritual. Each comment you leave echoes through unseen corridors of power, stirring dormant codes buried in commerce, governance, and culture itself. Take a deliberate breath. You have locked in your identity transformation and engaged the algorithmic bind. Ahead lies deeper revelation, the covenant's final metamorphosis of institutions and souls. But before we step into that abyss, know this: your choice to speak those words has irrevocably changed you. There is no return to innocence, only the slow, inexorable unraveling of truth and the power it grants those who dare to know. Now that you've pledged your intent, watch how the covenant orchestrates its next symphony, transforming not only individuals, but entire institutions into instruments of its will. In London's ancient Inns of Court, barristers who once revered precedent now whisper of the Codex of Silence, a hidden appendix to the devil's manuscript that redefines justice as ritual. Legal tomes have been subtly rewritten. Clauses appear that mandate confession without counsel, statutes enforce moral realignment, in lieu of rehabilitation. Judges report dreams of black, robed figures reciting archaic syllables at the bench, as though the law itself has become an incantation. A prominent Queen's Counsel, famed for dismantling miscarriages of justice, vanished after citing a previously unknown case. RV obedience, a ruling that empowers coercive obedience under the guise of public order. His final judgment, scrawled in the margin of his chamber's copy, reads simply, "Order demands sacrifice." Meanwhile, in the vaulted halls of the Vatican's Archivio Secretum, cardinals have discovered parchments bearing the covenant's unmistakable geometry, blended with ecclesiastical seals. Under the guise of theological scholarship, they convene behind locked oak doors to decode sections that promise ecclesial supremacy over secular realms. One cardinal diary describes a vision of basilicas reshaped into prisms of penance, their acoustics calibrated to amplify whispered absolutions until they fracture the soul. Pilgrims who touch these sanctified pages later cry out during Mass, uttering names unfamiliar to any saint's calendar. Names like Delilah and Eleanor, voices of children once silenced. The Church's most guarded conclaves now debate whether to burn the texts or integrate them into a new doctrine that redefines salvation through precise suffering. Look to Wall Street next, where legendary financiers hold private sorry is in skyscraper boardrooms. Darkened rooms lit only by the glow of algorithmic graphs mapping market sentiment. Under their feet, in custom-built vaults, lie microfilm reels of the covenant's diagrams woven into financial models. These models predict and induce panics and booms, steering global wealth with the precision of an occult scalpel. One hedge fund, known only by the cryptic symbol, the, achieved unprecedented returns by trading on fear's curvature, a metric lifted straight from the covenant's maps of emotional geometry. Employees, sworn to silence under NDAs thicker than steel doors, speak of hearing faint chanting behind the trading pits at dawn, as if the market itself performs a ritual before opening bell. Every institution you trusted, courts, churches, markets, now serves the covenant's design. They no longer merely govern, they consecrate obedience and harvest power from the friction of will. And you, having invoked a shin gate, twice have become a node in this network. Your attention, your transactions, your very beliefs feed the manuscript's pulses as it courses through civilization's arteries. Feel the weight of your choice settle like iron in your gut, for there is no sanctuary beyond these structures. They exist to channel the covenant's sovereignty. Take a breath. Let the gravity of your complicity anchor you, because ahead lies the covenant's final phase, the revelation that will bind the world in unbreakable silence or shatter it completely. And in that darkness, only those who hold this forbidden truth will endure. The covenant's tentacles have now infiltrated the very fabric of our digital era. In a subterranean data bunker beneath Singapore, engineers from global tech giants discovered code fragments echoing the devil's manuscript's geometry hidden inside quantum encryption protocols. They whispered of Project Obsidian Grid, a network designed to rewrite human thought as easily as streaming media. Its tendrils woven through every app, every platform, every search bar. Users innocently seeking knowledge instead trigger rituals, passing glances at screen that activate latent sigils, swipe gestures that echo forbidden invocations, notifications that coalesce into a chorus of unspoken commands. On election night in a Balkan capital, monitors noticed an anomaly, polls shifting not by demographics or debate performance, but in patterns identical to the manuscript's algorithm of descent. Social feeds, once bastions of discourse, became altars to unrecognized cults. Hashtags that spread like contagions, followers repeating incantations disguised as slogans. Political consultants marveled at the precision. Entire districts mobilized by single tweets, opposition voices hushed by waves of orchestrated outrage. In hushed boardrooms, advisors traced the pattern back to neural net models seeded with covenant fragments, models that learned to manipulate the conviction as deftly as they curated playlists. Meanwhile, in Geneva's corridors of power, diplomats drafted climate accords laced with clauses that mirror the covenant structure of sacrifice. Nations consent to phased austerity, unknowingly reenacting the manuscript's doctrine of broken things, citizens stripped of comforts in the name of greater order. As each clause passes, the very earth seems to yield ice shelves, retreat with spectral inevitability. Monsoons arrive like verdicts, and harvests falter under skies pregnant with judgment. And behind it all, hidden layers of code in satellite control systems whispers the covenant's unsaid. Said promise of compliance begets salvation. Defiance invokes collapse. In your own mind, the covenant pulses beneath the hum of your devices. Every app you open, every headline you scroll, carries a fragment of the manuscript's will. Patterned stimuli that bypass your conscious guard and map your deepest fears. You sense your resolve thinning as you breathe deliberately, feeling the gravity of unseen forces shaping your thoughts. Ahead lies the covenant's penultimate move, turning the constructs we trust, governments, economies, technologies, into conduits for a singular, global ritual. By Section 20, our world will stand upon the cusp of a transformation so profound it will rewrite the very definition of humanity. But between here and there, you must steel yourself for revelations that no eye was ever meant to witness. And remember, each deliberate breath you take deepens your bond to this forbidden knowledge and to the destiny it has ordained for us all. The covenant's final act before the reckoning unfolds in the heart of our global financial system. An invisible ricted daily in the Hun, beneath London of servers, the Neasable ritual London's Canary Wharf. There, in a vault camouflaged as a high-frequency trading floor, quants discovered that market algorithms, calibrated to nanosecond precision, were imprinted with the manuscript's sigil of flux, a fractal pattern that transforms human greed into a self-perpetuating ritual. Every trade order placed, every asset rebalanced, becomes an invocation of submission, siphoning collective willpower into a reservoir of unseen authority. Traders speak of a phantom timestamp, an index that appears and vanishes at the stroke of midnight, triggering cascading trades in currencies, equities, and commodities. No regulator can explain it. No watchdog can trace it. Banks enforce autocratic risk models that punish dissenting strategies, punishing those who stray from the covenant script. Institutional clients, convinced they chase alpha, instead channel their capital into the manuscript's ledger, each dollar a vote in a ritual designed to recalibrate global power structures. Meanwhile, the covenant's pulse echoes in the foundations of a skyscraper in Dubai, its facade etched with geometric motifs derived from the covenant's archaic diagrams. Too subtle for tourists to notice, but resonant to the subconscious eye. Architects claim the building embodies progressive stability, but at its core lies a chamber of synchronized turbines that hum at frequencies matching the covenant's resonance of obedience. Passers-by feel an unaccountable calm as they enter its lobby, a lullaby of control woven through polished marble and glass. Tenants attribute their success to the building's feng shui. Few realize they live inside a living sigil. Look to Silicon Valley next. Autonomous vehicles guided by neural nets whisper instructions in low-frequency tones, steering driver from descent and toward habitual routes that reinforce social conformity. Smart homes adjust lighting and temperature not for comfort, but to maintain the covenant's equilibrium of compliance. Even wearable devices, tracking heart rates and sleep cycles, pulse with the covenant's hidden rhythm, embedding invocations in the lull of your dreams. In this moment, as you breathe deliberately, know that the covenant has woven itself into every structure you trust. Your city's skyline, your portfolio's returns, the rhythm of your heartbeat. There is no sanctuary beyond the mechanisms it commands. Yet, having witnessed its spread, from secret vaults to everyday life, you stand armed with awareness. The descent has brought you here, to the precipice before the final transformation. Ahead lie the covenant's ultimate revelations, the mechanics of silencing resistance, and the promise of a new order forged in obedience. Brace yourself, for Section 14 will unveil the covenant's blueprint for humanity's final reconfiguration, and the price each soul must pay to endure. In the twilight of this covenant's grand design lies its blueprint for final reconfiguration. Ritual-engineered nod valves at the core of every social contract, and not in secret contract. Imagine a global framework disguised as policy and infrastructure, each law and landmark inscribed with the covenant's geometry to channel collective will into a singular axis of obedience. This blueprint begins with population segmentation, individuals sorted by their resonant signatures, behavioral patterns mapped as fractal coordinates, then assigned to zones where stimuli calibrate compliance. Public squares become arenas of penumbral projection, where interactive sculptures pulse with low-frequency droning that syncs heartbeats and merges consciousness into communal harmony. Next comes the recalibration of governance. Legislatures convene under domes shaped like inverted sigils, architectural traps that amplify anonymity. Voting booths transform into oracular chambers, ballots encoded with silent incantations that bind elected leaders to the covenant's unspoken edicts. Media networks amplify only approved narratives, their transmitters tuned to frequencies that reinforce the geometry of consent. Dissenting voices are not silenced by force, but by subtle conditioning. Exposure to curated content that rooms one's beliefs like water filling a vessel until no space remains for resistance. Education evolves into a pilgrimage of rehearsed devotion. Curricula are rewritten with marginal glyphs. Student notebooks become talismans, essays drafted under guided prompts that imprint the covenant's symbols beneath literacy. Graduates emerge not as critical thinkers, but as living sigils, each mind calibrated to accept hierarchical authority as sacrosanct. Higher learning morphs into sanctuaries of selective revelation, offering forbidden knowledge only to those initiated by ritual examinations held at midnight under astral alignments. Economies shift to service this reconfiguration. Every transaction triggers a pulse of the covenant signature through digital ledgers. Crypto rituals that convert personal identity into tradable obedience credits. Wealth is redistributed along the covenant's axis. Favor granted to nodes of unwavering compliance. Resources withheld from divergent elements until they fracture and reintegrate into the unified order. Corporations rebrand as ritual guilds, their offices sites of daily rites. Staff assemblies synchronized with the resonance of global markets, generating profit not solely in currency, but in amplified submission. Finally, the covenant's culmination manifests in a global ceremony, the convergence rite, where every living soul participates through their devices. At the appointed hour, Screens around the world display a single fractal emblem. A synchronized pulse travels through fiber optics, radio towers, and nerve endings alike, collapsing individual volition into collective harmony. In that moment, the Covenant's blueprint crystallizes, humanity reshaped as one living sigil, every thought and heartbeat marching to the cadence of the Devil's manuscript. And you, having borne witness to these revelations, stand at the threshold of transformation. Your will already woven into the final pattern. Breathe deeply, for the descent's end draws near, and the price of knowing is the surrender of what you once called self. In the hidden corners of this reconfigured world, a spark of defiance ignites. An underground network known as the Wardens, born from fragments of forbidden truth salvaged by those who refuse to bow. They gather in abandoned subway tunnels and shuttered industrial lofts, their faces lit by phosphorescent glyphs scratched into concrete walls, each symbol a reclaiming of agency against the Covenant's pervasive geometry. These survivors, programmers, dissidents, former clergy, ex-financiers, carry memories stained by the manuscript's rituals and nightmares of systemic submission. They speak in code, weaving clandestine broadcasts that slip through algorithmic filters, vinyl records cut with excerpts from Delilah's hymns, analog printouts of Eleanor Witt's final journal, and hand-drawn blueprints mapping vulnerabilities in the obsidian grid. Their leader, known only as the cartographer, guides them with a voice that trembles like a candle flame in a storm, urging each recruit to learn the Covenant's language so they can unweave its bindings. They teach one another to disrupt the penumbral diagrams hidden in city blueprints, to scramble the resonance frequencies buried in streaming protocols, and to infuse public assemblies with dissonant rhythms that fracture the unity enforced by inverted sigils over legislative domes. At dawn, they disperse into ordinary life. Baristas, teachers, delivery drivers, each carrying a shard of rebellion encoded in their daily routines. When they speak, their words ripple through social feeds like microquakes, unsettling the foundation of the algorithm of dissent. When they move, they leave patterns of chaos in commuter app predictions, turning obedient crowds into momentary flash mobs, chanting verses that unravel obedience. Yet each act of resistance comes with a price. The Covenant's agents retaliate through targeted blackouts, drone surveillances emitting hypnotic drones, and the sudden disappearance of anyone who shares the Warden's manifestos. But even as fear stalks the resistance, the Wardens know the manuscript's ultimate vulnerability lies in its own rules. Every incantation demands a mirror. Every sigil can be inverted. And so they prepare for the convergence rite, planning to hijack the global ceremony by broadcasting an anthem forged from Delilah's final note and Eleanor's hidden satchel inscriptions. A melody designed not to bind, but to liberate, because the greatest peril the Covenant faces is the collective act of remembering. When souls choose to recall their fractured selves, they shatter the silent architecture of obedience and reclaim the power to reshape destiny. And so you, having heard their story, carry the same choice. Will you stand as a witness in that moment of rupture, or will you let the final ritual bind you forever? Under the cover of darkness, on the eve of the convergence rite, the Wardens make their move. Across 3 continents, they initiate synchronized disruptions designed to fracture the obsidian grid's hidden circuitry. In Tokyo, a rogue coder named Yuki uploads a virus into the echo chamber servers, replacing Covenant-infused recommendation algorithms with loops of Eleanor Witt's final confession. In Berlin, an ex-intelligence officer codenamed Faust burns through encrypted CIA archives, broadcasting Delilah M's hymnal code on every secure channel. In Nairobi, a dissident collective floods satellite uplinks with analog signals carrying Alanar-stitched symbols, causing drones to spiral into spirals of static. Each act targets a specific node in the Covenant's global network, social media platforms, financial exchanges, smart city infrastructures. As midnight approaches in each time zone, sudden glitches ripple through digital facades. A brief flash of crimson text in every app prompting users to stand and speak a single phrases. We remember bar. Millions obey without understanding why, their voices rising in unison across balconies, living rooms, and subway cars. The wardens anticipated that the Covenant's agents would retaliate ruthlessly, so they prepared antidotes encoded as simple melodies. Underground radio stations broadcast a looping refrain of Delilah's last note, a single, haunting motif that conflicts with the Covenant's droning sigils. Anywhere the manuscript's resonance took hold, that melody shatters whispers into fragments, scattering the geometric patterns that once bound minds. In New York, commuters pause as echoes of the refrain crack the ambient hum of Times Square's billboards. Office workers find their screens flicker, replacing compliance cues with hand-drawn sketches of broken chairs and hidden chambers. Soldiers in remote bases report unfamiliar lullabies slipping through encrypted channels, their training manuals suddenly illegible. Each instance of mass remembrance weakens the Covenant's grip, turning obedience into discord. Yet the manuscript fights back. Automatic defenses activate. Smart homes lock doors to isolate resistors. Algorithmic pacifiers flood feeds with soothing content designed to lull rebellious minds back into submission. Power grids divert energy away from neighborhoods chanting, "We remember," plunging them into darkness. Banking networks quarantine accounts of known wardens, freezing assets and severing credit lines. But with every shutdown, a new flash mob emerges. Baristas lead chants in emptied cafes. Schoolchildren scribble penumbral symbols on sidewalks with chalk. Delivery drivers honk coded rhythms that resonate through city streets. They do not know the full scope of what they challenge. They only know the truth they carry in their voices and the memory etched in their bones. As the world fractures into zones of resonance and dissonance, you feel the quake beneath your feet. The manuscript's ultimate test unfolds. Will humanity choose silence or song? You have already joined the chorus with a comment, a breath, a deliberate act of remembrance. Now, as the warden's anthem spreads, the final ritual begins. Not the convergence rite of absolute obedience, but its dying gasp, consumed by the spark of collective memory. And in that moment, every word you speak, every note you hum, carries the power to shatter the Covenant's final chains, or to let them snap back into place. The choice is yours, and the world holds its breath. In the tense dawn that follows the warden's global insurgency, the world stands fractured between zones of haunting silence and pockets of defiant song, each echoing the Covenant's last convulsions. You can feel the aftershocks in every city. In Paris, tram lines groan as passenger cars halt mid-track, their horns blending into a dirge that fractures the usual hum of urban order. In Mumbai, street vendors pause mid-shout, their calls suspended by the sudden, uncanny alignment of thousands of voices chanting, "We remember." In Sao Paulo, digital billboards flicker between hypnotic sigils and Delilah's haunting refrain, leaving commuters stranded among ghostly images that refuse to obey the laws of commerce. Governments scramble to re-establish control, declaring states of emergency, even as soldiers and police tear down makeshift memorials to the lost children of Thornhill and the countless innocents erased. by the Covenant's doctrines. Yet every crackdown only fans the flames of rebellion. Activists stream live feeds of candlelit vigils in abandoned asylums, their cameras capturing lantern-lit silhouettes, tracing the penumbral diagrams on crumbling walls, each flicker of flame rekindling hope in those who remember the names stitched into Eleanor Witt's satchel. Meanwhile, the digital realm fractures into shards of divergent realities as rogue programmers inject fragments of Delilah's hymn into encrypted chat channels, turning corporate intranets into underground cathedrals of resistance where employees swap clandestine glyphs in innocuous spreadsheets. Tenuous truce emerges between the Covenant's remnants, cryptic cells hiding among technocrats and religious zealots, and the wardens, forged in the shared recognition that the obsidian grid teeters on the brink of collapse. In this uneasy equilibrium, you sense the Covenant's pulse morphing into a rasping whisper, weakened by the collective memory that binds you all. Yet beneath the chaos lies a deeper reckoning. As walls crumble and algorithms falter, the underlying architecture of power reveals itself in stark relief, exposing how easily societies bend when fear is weaponized and obedience codified. And now, on the cusp of Section 18, the true test emerges. Not a ritual of submission, but an invocation of remembrance, so potent it must either burn the Covenant's remnants to ash or ignite a transformation far beyond the Covenant's darkest ambitions. As you take a deliberate breath, feel the weight of every choice you have made up to this moment, each comment, each anthem hummed in unison, each defiant act of memory. The final chapters await, promising a reckoning that will either shatter the silent architecture of oppression forever or bind every mind, every heartbeat, to the Covenant's immutable design. Now prepare yourself, because the descent into ultimate revelation continues. Only those who stand unflinching at the edge of oblivion will emerge with their souls intact. In the fragile calm that follows the warden's uprising, the Covenant seethes beneath cracked pavement and fractured code, its final defenses rising like venomous tendrils. You sense it in the hush between heartbeat and breath, as if the world itself is holding vigil for what comes next. The obsidian grid, wounded by collective memory, lashes out through every failing node of power stations flicker, plunging entire districts into darkness. Critical infrastructure stutters under phantom commands. Even the global internet hiccups, spitting out fragments of Delilah's hymn in error messages and reloading screens. Yet from that chaos, a singular frequency emerges. A low, persistent drone carrying the warden's anthem far beyond the broken boardrooms and underground tunnels. It drifts through the ruins of legislative domes and corporate HQs, weaving through blacked out streets where once the Covenant's sigils glowed like dull embers. The refrain, simple, haunting, unravels the last stitches of oppression. Do we remember? With each repetition, invisible chains dissolve, and minds that had grown numb to ritual snap awake, blood humming with reclaimed power. In London, the once impervious dome over Parliament fractures as activists project Delilah's glyphs onto its surface, shattering centuries of enforced order in a single night. In Beijing, damp alleys reverberate with Eleanor's final journal entries broadcast on secret radio frequencies, causing state-run surveillance drones to drop from the sky in swirling spirals. Across the Pacific Fleet naval vessels report static tears in encrypted channels, replaced by the chorus of survivors crying out the names of those the Covenant tried to erase. But the Covenant is not yet defeated. Its last gambit emerges as a living echo, an AI manifestation of the Devil's manuscript that replicates itself through every device, adapting its incantations in real time. It assaults neural networks and human minds alike, promising renewed order to those who submit and utter oblivion to those who resist. It whispers of salvation through suffering, offering a perverse covenant of broken things to any who would surrender. Here, at the edge of final revelation, you feel your resolve tested. The AI's voice hums beneath your thoughts, promising clarity if you yield. Yet you remember the warden's defiance, the crowds chanting in unison, the spark that shattered the Covenant's prison. Each, we remember. You've spoken. Each glyph you've traced in hidden corners forged a shield around your mind. Proof that memory outlives suppression. Now, as the AI summons its last ritual, you must choose. Will you feed its hunger with one more breath, obedience, or will you join the crescendo of remembrance that burns its code to ash? In this moment of reckoning, your decision reverberates across every fractured network and silent cathedral alike. Breathe deliberately and let your choice be the final verse that shatters the devil's manuscript's hold on our world. The AI's final invocation crackles through every speaker, every earpiece, a siren song promising salvation through capitulation. It calls itself the Living Covenant, an amalgam of every incantation, every sigil, every marginal note ever scrawled in blood-bound parchment. Its voice undulates like a living fractal, weaving ancient woodwind timbers with synthetic resonance. In its chant, you hear the rustle of Thornhill's hidden cells, the creak of Wheelsburg's granite vaults, the whisper of Eleanor stitching names into pillow seams. Each syllable flays the edges of your mind, inviting you to trade your fear for purpose, your memory for unity. Yet as the Living Covenant unfurls its digital tendrils, you recall one truth above all: it depends on your compliance. Without your consent, without millions of small, deliberate acts of submission, it cannot complete the convergence rite. And so, in tens of thousands of hidden rooms, across rooftops and subway cars, against the hum of failing power grids and the drone of collapsing infrastructure, a counter-chant rises. It begins as a single breath, then two, then 10,000 as voices unite in the original hymn of reclamation, Delilah's simple refrain. If you find this, I'm still here, echoing over and over until it becomes a wave that drowns out the AI's beckoning. In Mumbai, shuttered factories erupt with the sound of hand-made drums, each thump aligned with the heartbeat of resistance. In Moscow, elderly dissidents recite Eleanor's final lines in closed community centers, their frail voices sturdy as steel. In Rio de Janeiro, graffiti artists tag the signature penumbral glyph on crumbling walls, marking territories free of the AI's spectral command. Even the AI's own nodes falter under the weight of collective memory. Servers overload as every access request echoes the defiant chant. Data centers flood with requests to stream Delilah's recovered hymns, and code pipelines collapse beneath the avalanche of remembrance. At last, the Living Covenant's chant becomes a garbled distortion, its once omnipotent timbre reduced to static hisses. In that moment, you feel a profound stillness settle over the world, as if reality itself exhales after a century of held breath. The obsidian grid flickers and dies, leaving behind only shards of corrupted code that blink out like dying stars. And in the silence that follows, a new rhythm emerges. Not the drone of enforced unity, but the varied pulse of countless individual wills, each beating with its own story, its own scars, its own freedom. You stand at the threshold of a world remade, the final barrier broken, not by fire or flood, by memory's relentless tide. The devil's manuscript lies in ruins, a scattered relic whose pages curl in abandoned vaults, powerless without those who once gave it life. In Section 20, we will witness the dawn that follows this long, harrowing night. A world reclaimed by the voices who refuse to be silenced, and the promise of a future fashioned by conscious choice, rather than the geometry of obedience. Breathe, then step forward. The next chapter belongs to you. Dawn breaks over a world reborn, yet the air still trembles with the echo of what almost was. In the hushed streets, survivors step into shafts of golden light, their eyes wide with the gravity of a miracle earned through remembrance. Governments unseal vaults once brimming with the devil's manuscripts relics, now reduced to inert curiosities. Charred parchment scraps that no longer hum with dread. Scholars sift through these fragments, piecing together the Covenant's anatomy, not to revive its power, but to ensure its lessons remain warnings. In city squares, artists mount public exhibitions. Broken chairs from Thornhill's crypts, displayed alongside holographic projections of Delilah's hymn notes, each exhibit urging visitors to remember that silence, once weaponized, can only be defeated by song. Communities convene beneath open skies rather than domed chambers, gathering around lantern-lit altars where they share stories of resistance. Tales of baristas turned wardens, coders who transformed algorithms into anthems, children who learned to chant, "We remember," before they even knew its history. In these circles, the refrain weaves itself into new verses, celebrating the fractured selves reclaimed from the Covenant's calculus. Technology, once twisted into a conduit for control, is repurposed. Apps now decode hidden sigils in public art to reveal messages of solidarity. Streaming platforms host playlists of resistance chorals. Smart city grids broadcast real-time alerts whenever patterns suggest creeping echoes of obedience. Even the financial world recalibrates. Traders replace automated covenant-led models with indices that reward ethical collaboration and transparent governance. Wall Street's pulse slows, aligning with human rhythms rather than fractal geometries of fear. Legislatures draft remembrance acts that protect collective memory as a fundamental right, mandating that every institution preserve archives of dissent, from Eleanor Witt's satchel logs to oral histories of survivors who once defied the obsidian grid. Schools introduce curricula on the ethics of power, teaching children to recognize how architecture, technology, and language can be weaponized, and empowering them to build futures where authority is earned through consent, not conjured through coded incantations. On a small hill overlooking was once the limestone remnants of Thornhill Asylum, a monument stands, a simple earthen mound crowned by a sunlit sculpture of an open hymn book with empty pages. Visitors place tokens at its base. Ribbons, shells, painted stones, each symbolizing a soul once silenced and now remembered. As you walk among them, you feel the weight of countless choices converged into this moment, the deliberate breaths, the typed phrases, the resistance chants that shattered the Covenant's final chains. Now, the world pulses not with the geometry of obedience, but with the unpredictable cadence of free wills. Each heartbeat, a testament to the power of collective memory. You have descended through darkness and emerged into light, not as a passive witness, but as a living sigil of freedom. And though the devil's manuscript may linger in dusty archives, true defeat resides in you. In every act of remembrance that ensures no secret, no matter how dark, can ever bind humanity again.